Hi, I'm Amy and I'm here with Cara. We're doing a project to capture people's memories for the School Digital Champion programme. We're here with Nora O'Connor. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, now that's a big question. I'm 64 years old and I'm retired for the last few years, and I was a teacher here in the secondary school for 25 years, and then I became a teacher of teachers around the country, going around on CPD, continuous professional development, to other teachers.
You were a teacher for many years. What changes have you seen in education over the years?
Yes, many changes. When I was in school myself, I went into a small school in a village, in Bursley, just out the road, and we only had 100 students in the whole school. So it was a very private little setting, and every child was known to every teacher, and they knew everything about you. So there was a very caring but also pressured feeling, because you were under the spotlight at all times and there was very little freedom. But school was much simpler at another level, because you just had to go in, do the small little bit that you were involved in. It was mostly nuns that taught us. We had a few lay teachers, and the nuns were very particular about manners and politeness and getting us to be young ladies, and we didn't have very many choices with regard to what you were going to do when you grew up. It was teaching or nursing or the civil service. Basically, that was about it. And if you were good enough at school and you didn't have to have any points in your leaving cert, you just had to have 2 honours at the time, and 2 honours meant kind of 2 C's. Imagine that. You could get into university. So, those who had enough money to send them to university, people went on. So I became a home economics teacher. And I loved home economics. And I did that up in Sligo. And it was a 3-year course. So school was very different then. I got a job here in Nina, and it was the only job I had. And that's where I met Luke. He was a teacher here as well. So we ended up getting married a good few years later. But anyway, school is the topic. So home economics teaching was very interesting because it was a practical subject. And that went through huge changes in the last 25 or 30 years as well, because it went from being a totally practically examined subject to a theoretical subject. So it moved from examining sewing and knitting and cleaning and housekeeping and cooking to the theory of all of that. So you have very little practical nowadays and a lot more theory. Now, I think it's a pity that there's so much theory and less practical. I think the practical is missing. But that's because that's the way I was taught myself, and I saw the advantages of it. Dealing with the students nowadays are much more vocal, much more open, much more engaging at certain levels. They were fearful in some ways. The teacher was up there and the student was down there, and you did what you were told a lot. The other thing that's very different, of course, is the technology. We always had a certain amount of technology in cookery rooms because you had the equipment. So you were teaching about how things were made and how you could repair something and what an electrical circuit was and how a house worked. So you were always teaching that element of home economics to the students. So you had a bit of technology and a bit of practical work always going on in your teaching. But once the IT came in, you were able to show that on a screen, and that transformed things. The other thing is that you didn't have to use chalk anymore. You could use overhead projector was the first thing. We actually wrote with pens on a piece of plastic, and would put the plastic up onto a screen, and that would be projected onto the wall. So then we moved on to photocopying. It was an enormous advantage when photocopiers came into school, because you had a thing called a Gestetner before that, where you wrote out everything by hand on a page, and you'd put that down on a machine, and the machine would copy it in your handwriting. And that was the only copier that you had. So if you gave somebody a recipe, instead of they having to write it down, you'd write it out once and go to the Gestetner and copy it out. But every copy you had to manually do 1, 2, 3, 4, and you did it manually yourself. So all that change in technology has been enormous. And it's so much so now that I suppose I wouldn't be able to keep up with anything that you're actually able to do. A certain amount, and I try to keep up, but not anything to the same extent. You would outrun all of us in the ICT skills. What else has changed? I suppose attitude. The attitude of students to school. They seem to be very focused in relation to what they want out of school. So they're strategic in their planning for exams, point systems. You know, you just do exactly what the course will tell you for the exam questions. Whereas when we were going to school, we hadn't a clue what was going to come up in the exams. So you were given this broad education, and at one level that was fantastic, because you didn't have the pressure of the exam. So the teacher could expound on something interesting or someplace interesting they were, and the students weren't saying, oh, come on, get on with the course, in their heads. So things have changed a lot.
If you were choosing your career again, would you still choose teaching?
I loved teaching, absolutely loved it, every aspect of it. But there are lots of other things, so much available to us now. I would love to have been a doctor, actually. In the biology side of home economics, I absolutely loved that. So even still, I'm always investigating and looking at those programs and all of that kind of thing. So, but then if I was a doctor, maybe I'd be a teaching doctor. Do you know, because I actually loved teaching as well. It's just that wasn't available to me at the time. It didn't even come into the radar that I could possibly be a doctor.
What is your favourite memory as a student and as a teacher?
As a student, As a student, my favourite time was actually Saturday. We went to Saturday school. But on Saturdays, it was a particular nun wanted to teach us music appreciation and art, because we didn't have that during the week. The school was so small, we didn't have a music teacher or an art teacher. But she used to bring us in on a Saturday, and we'd have an hour and a half of music and an hour and a half of art. And it opened up my mind to all that area, that I didn't have a chance to explore different artists. And she taught us how to dance, all the different dances and all the different genres of music, you know, jazz and reggae and all the different things. And she introduced us to classical music. I remember her teaching us the name is gone, but it was like the sound of a bumblebee. You know, that music like a bumblebee, and she was explaining it to us and all that feeling. I loved that about school. As a teacher, I suppose a bit like Luke, it was when somebody got the message, you know, or somebody was awake to something that you were trying to explain to them, and they actually learnt. And when they were engaged with the subject, I mean, there's a phrase again, and it's called somebody being in their element. They're absolutely loving what they're doing. That's when teaching was really nice.
Thank you.